Redditors who went to private religious schools, what are your horror stories?
Let me begin by saying I came up really poor and went to inner city public schools. However, I went to a Catholic school for 7th grade. I'm not exactly sure why, but some rich, older guy paid my tuition and bought my school uniforms. This was definitely a huge culture shock for me. These kids talked about playing video games and talked about going to the beach, amusement parks, arcades, and having their own bedrooms. Things I could only dream of. One of my biggest fears while I attended this school was anyone finding out just how poor I was and knowing that I didn't belong there. I liked this school and learned a great deal there compared to the schools I attended previously. I was very self-conscious and was afraid if anyone found out that I wouldn't be able to go to school there anymore. One precaution I took every day was empty my backpack out and shake everything out to make sure I wouldn't bring roaches to school as my house was infested. We had desks in our home rooms that we kept our school supplies and books in. We went to other classrooms for different subjects, but ended up in our home rooms a few times a day. As an example, my homeroom teacher was also my history and math teacher. One day I was in religion class, and it happened. The teacher said to pull out our binders for an assignment. I pulled mine out and laid it on the desk, which I knew belonged to a girl named Rachel. I opened it up and a few small roaches were inside and started moving around frantically as the light hit them. I was absolutely terrified. I tried to subtly crush them with my fingers and wipe their remains on my pants. My actions were not subtle apparently. Everyone turned in my direction and the teacher moved in my direction and saw the horror I was facing. The teacher stood me up and moved me away from the desk. She said out loud to the class that Rachel must have left candy in her desk and that the roaches must have found it throughout the night. She saved me and I'll never forget her. Did you know it was a rich older guy when he paid it, or did you grow up thinking it was some crazy old lady in a wedding dress? I knew the guy. As far as I know, he didn't have any obligations to my family. Maybe he was just generous? Maybe it was a payoff? Maybe he was some crazy old lady in a wedding dress pretending to be some rich old guy. My parents love to tell a story about what a difficult student I was. The story, as they tell it, is that I once accused my math teacher of being a Nazi because I don't like math. What actually happened was that my math teacher spent an entire period fantasizing out loud about the day when God would ordain good Christians rounding up and killing all the gays. I called him a Nazi because he was standing there daydreaming about committing genocide to a class full of 16-year-olds. I got the problem child label, too. Took me a while to realize it wasn't because I was an actual problem and more because they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. Beyond true. My teacher made fun of me to the whole class for believing in nursery rhymes because I pointed out she had the wrong number of days on the big crepe paper calendar, by quoting the whole 30 days hath September thing. I also had to stare at the wall for an hour after telling my 6th grade teacher that it was longitude not longitude as she thought. There are 4 lights. Fuckers. I attended Catholic school from kindergarten through high school, then went back and taught in both a Catholic elementary school and high school, and let me tell you that rules and punishments are far more rigid and ridiculous for employees than they are for students. You sign a contract stating that not only will you conduct yourself by the rules and standards of the church when at work, but also outside of the workplace. It was when a fellow teacher had become pregnant out of wedlock, and was thus terminated, losing her income and insurance, when she needed it most, that I decided to quit. I learned later that my officious and ultra-conservative principal was addicted to quaaludes. The hypocrisy in those places never ceases to astound me. I got 2 weeks detention for bringing a kid's book on evolution to school and asking if evolution made it possible for all the animals to fit on the ark, and so my thinking was that back in Noah's day there was only one species of elephant, horse, lion, etc., so there wouldn't be the problem of fitting multiple species of one family into the ark, and so then after the ark evolution kicked in and we got different species after they repopulated the world. To my mind, this was a perfectly fine way to resolve the young earth equals evolution bad plus science is cool conflict I was having. Nope. Apparently I was thinking too much and needed to be punished for not believing what the Bible said. I've always thought this way. If something did create us, then it almost certainly put a system in place where things could change and adapt. If something has created us, then science is the rules it has put in place. I've always taken the view that if there's a creator, the fundamental constants of nature are the creator's laws. A powerful creator setting up the universe just right so that it naturally conforms to his will as an inevitable consequence of his initial design is far more elegant than taking an allegorical story literally to the point of absurdity. Sir Isaac Newton saw his advances of physics as revealing God's intricate designs rather than some sort of rationalism versus religion conflict. My best friend growing up went to one for a year. He was in public school with me till he had a health problem. His parents were scared the kids would make fun of him, so they transferred him. The next year he showed back up at the school and told us, there was nothing actually Christian about Christian school, which seemed really poignant coming from a 12-year-old. His stories showed those kids were much crueler than any I ever encountered at school. I agree with him. I went to 2 different Christian schools and can say firsthand that if you don't fit into their idea of a good little Christian boy or girl, expressed any individuality, or any of the 2 different major gangs or cliques in the school, and you will be immediately outcast by students and parents. I went through this firsthand, but was too young to realize it then. They are worse than the vast majority of public schools. The girls are catty and very annoying, and the guys are assholes or pricks, depending if they come from a rich family or not. There were a few people that didn't care, but that was the majority. I don't know how much of a horror story this is, but I still think back on it sometimes. I went to Catholic school when I was a kid, and every Thursday, I'd walk with the rest of my class to a nearby church to attend a students-only mass. Unlike the rest of my friends, though, I hadn't been baptized, which meant that I was expressly forbidden from participating in the snack time portion of the service. Everyone else would stand up, shuffle between the pews, and get their little cracker, while I was forced to sit and watch, envious and hungry. Mass usually took place immediately before lunchtime, which may have been part of the issue. Anyway, one day, the local priest came to my class to discuss something or other, and he brought a supply of unblessed communion wafers with him. Since they hadn't yet been subjected to the ritualistic hand-waving and prayer-reciting process, I was finally allowed to consume one. But before I had the chance, one of my classmates made an observation. "These taste different," she said. Our teacher, a former nun, nodded knowingly. Yes, they always taste different when they haven't been blessed. This seemed peculiar to me, and it prompted me to ask a question of my own. When you bless them, I asked the priest, do all of these in the church get blessed? Yes, that's why we keep them in the tabernacle, he replied. The conversation continued after that, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was busy hatching a plan. With as much dexterity as my 9-year-old fingers could manage, I broke my wafer down the middle, sampling the smaller of the 2 halves and then keeping the larger piece in my desk. When the next Thursday rolled around, I brought the bit that I'd saved along with me, waited for the blessing to occur, then ate the rest of it. It tasted the same to me. Too long, didn't read. I once stole a blessing in an effort to taste test Jesus. That's such a kid thing to do. I remember one of the kids in my Sunday school asked a deacon if the wafers tasted different after being blessed. Dude looked at him like he was an idiot and told him it was a symbolic cracker and a blessing will not make it taste any better. Cracked me up. Thanks for making me remember that. I have such a great story my friend told me. He grew up in the Deep South, so was brought up a Baptist. He went through a rough patch of addiction, and made a friend in recovery that was Catholic. They agreed to attend each other's churches during this time. My buddy, telling me the story with his thick Southern accent, was clueless about Catholicism, and I have no idea why his friend didn't guide him better. But he goes up for communion, having no idea what he's doing. So he gets the wafer, and then when offered the wine cup, saw that there was only a small amount in there. He drained the cup. With 100 people still behind him waiting for Jesus' blood to touch their lips, he drained it. He said the poor woman was horrified, and looked around in a panic. The priest had to consecrate more wine while everyone shot daggers at him. Still makes me chuckle, thinking about it. Parents forced me to enroll in a private Pentecostal college before I turned 18. Semester 1, 18 years old and a stricter curfew than I had growing up. Campus would lick down at 1:30. If you showed up late you had to check in with security and be escorted back into the dorm. After 3 strikes you got fined for every tardy. Or the other option was to not have anywhere to go. I guess it's better that you don't have a place to sleep than if you're allowed to be a dumbass 18-19-year-old. I eventually figured out that if I shimmied down the freight elevator to the basement, I could unlock the old storeroom door that led outside. Never saw a fine again. Mandatory chapel. 5 days a week. Let me rephrase that. Mandatory evangelical chapel. If you missed 6 or more in a semester, you got fined for each one. A lot of the good Christian kids going to be pastors and shit would scan their card and just go back to the dorm for Halo or nap time. I never liked lying, so I felt worse for scanning and leaving than just not wanting to go. So I got more fines. A kid got asbestos poisoning from the wall. It's not like it happened because of us, but we probably made it worse. There was a super shitty patch job for a piece of sheetrock they installed. No mudding or taping around the patch, just 4 easily accessible screws in the corners. So naturally we unscrewed it. To find out that the inside of the was big enough to get inside and climb up the studs, braces in the wall. Made it to the 5th floor, the top floor, and found all this old medical device equipment and x-rays, roof access etc. The kid that slept on the bunk, literally the floor, next to where we removed the sheetrock patch went home a year later with $3 million settlement and asbestos poisoning. Instead of updating the building and fixing the problems, the university spent millions of dollars on a new chapel building. Finally, one more. A handful of the gays banded together to demand a real conversation, respect, better treatment, and acceptance. A kid I grew up seeing in Bible camps was part of it. I was super happy he just finally came out and accepted himself. That was the last day I saw him. The school kicked all the gays out, and I never heard from him again. Super nice dude, and he had it so hard growing up in the shit state we lived in. He finally escaped and made it to the city, only to have these zealous pieces of shit throw him out on the street. The only good thing about this experience was that it started me on a real journey to find God. That led me to atheism. Life is much better these days. Total fines for 1.5 years of church college, $6,000. My card apparently scanned, but didn't record all the chapel visits. I worked overnight security on the weekends. Instead of giving me an exclusion like they said they would, they fined me. Also, I failed English 101 because I said $5 million on a new chapel wouldn't make it a better place to worship, and that if it was true, God must not give a shit about an African believer praying on a dirt floor. So that was another wasted $2,800.